41. Baby found mother bear, consoling parents of sick children. Every night, what she did. Put everyone in tears. Before moving into the story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. The fluorescent lights in the children's wing of Mercy General Hospital hummed their familiar tune, casting long shadows across the polished linoleum floors. It was well past midnight when Ethan Marshall first heard it. A sound so soft, so gentle, that he almost convinced himself it was just the wind moving through the pine trees that surrounded the hospital. But there was something different about this sound. Something that made him pause in his restless pacing beside his son's hospital bed. Ethan had been keeping vigil for 3 weeks now, ever since 7-year-old Tommy had been admitted with a rare blood disorder that left doctors scratching their heads and parents clinging to hope. His wife, Lily Morgan, had finally succumbed to exhaustion around 10 that evening, curled up in the uncomfortable reclining chair that had become her second home. Her auburn hair fell across her face as she slept, and Ethan could see the stress lines that had appeared seemingly overnight, etched around her eyes like delicate spider webs. The sound came again, drifting through the partially open window. It was low and rhythmic, almost like humming, but with a quality that seemed to resonate in his chest. Ethan moved closer to the window, careful not to wake Lily or disturb the various machines that monitored Tommy's vital signs. The boy looked so small in the hospital bed, his usually rosy cheeks pale against the white pillowcase, his breathing steady but labored. Outside, the forest stretched endlessly into the darkness. Mercy General had been built on the edge of the Cascade National Forest, and on clear days you could see mountains in the distance. The hospital's architects had deliberately positioned the children's wing to face the woods, believing that the natural view would provide comfort to young patients and their families. Tonight, however, the darkness seemed absolute, broken only by the occasional security light along the walking paths. The humming continued, and Ethan found himself leaning against the window frame, his forehead pressed against the cool glass. There was something deeply soothing about the sound, something that made the tight knot of anxiety in his chest loosen just a fraction. He had been running on coffee and pure adrenaline for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to truly relax, even for a moment. "Can't sleep either?" a soft voice asked behind him. Ethan turned to see Jessica Brooks, the night nurse who had become something of a guardian angel to the families on this floor. She was in her mid-30s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that seemed to calm even the most anxious parents. Jessica had been working the night shift in pediatrics for over a decade, and she had a way of moving through the ward like a whisper, checking on patients and offering comfort without ever seeming intrusive. "I keep thinking I hear something," Ethan said quietly, not wanting to wake Lily. "Like music or singing. It's probably just my imagination." Jessica moved to stand beside him at the window, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the floor. She listened for a moment, her head tilted slightly to one side. "I hear it too," she said after a long pause. "Started about a week ago. Some of the other parents have mentioned it as well." Relief flooded through Ethan. He wasn't losing his mind after all. "What do you think it is?" Jessica shrugged, but there was something thoughtful in her expression. "Could be anything. Maybe someone has a radio playing somewhere in the woods, or it could be the wind through the trees. Sound travels strangely at night, especially when it's this quiet." They stood in comfortable silence, both listening to the gentle rhythmic sound that seemed to ebb and flow like a tide. There was something hypnotic about it, something that made Ethan's eyelids feel heavy for the first time in days. The constant worry that had been his companion since Tommy's diagnosis seemed to recede, just a little, pushed back by the mysterious lullaby from the forest. Mrs. Chen in room 312 mentioned it yesterday, Jessica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She said it reminded her of her grandmother's singing. And Mr. Rodriguez down the hall said it sounded like a prayer his mother used to say when he was sick as a child. Ethan nodded, understanding exactly what they meant. There was something deeply familiar about the sound, something that touched a part of his memory he couldn't quite access. It was like trying to remember a dream after waking, the details slipping away even as he reached for them. The children seem calmer on the nights when it happens, Jessica added, glancing back at Tommy's sleeping form. Their vitals are more stable, and they sleep more peacefully. It's probably just coincidence, but... She trailed off, but Ethan knew what she meant. In a place like this, where hope was often the only medicine that really mattered, even coincidences could feel like miracles. He looked back at his son, studying the rise and fall of his small chest, the way his fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. Tommy had always been a restless sleeper, tossing and turning throughout the night. But tonight he lay perfectly still, his face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. The humming continued for another 10 minutes before gradually fading away, leaving behind only the familiar sounds of the hospital at night. The soft beeping of monitors, the distant murmur of voices at the nurse's station, the occasional footsteps in the hallway. But somehow, the silence felt different now, less oppressive and more comforting. "I should check on the other patients," Jessica said, but she didn't move immediately. Instead, she continued to gaze out at the dark forest, as if hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was creating the mysterious sound. "Jessica," Ethan said as she turned to go, "thank you for everything. I know this isn't easy work, and I want you to know how much it means to us, having someone like you here." The nurse smiled, and for a moment her professional composure slipped, revealing the genuine compassion beneath. "It's families like yours that make it worthwhile," she said. "Tommy's going to be fine, Mr. Marshall. I can feel it." After she left, Ethan remained at the window for a long time, staring out into the darkness and hoping to hear the sound again. But the forest remained silent, keeping its secrets hidden among the towering pines. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and he made his way back to the chair beside Tommy's bed, where he finally managed to drift off to sleep. His dreams were filled with music and gentle voices, and for the first time in weeks, he slept without nightmares. The next morning brought the usual routine of doctor visits and tests, but there was something different in the air. Several of the families mentioned hearing the mysterious sound, and word began to spread through the ward like ripples on a pond. Some of the staff dismissed it as stress-induced hallucinations or the product of overtired minds, but others, like Jessica, began to pay closer attention. Dr. Sarah Williams, the attending pediatrician, was initially skeptical when Jessica mentioned the phenomenon during the morning briefing. Dr. Williams was a practical woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and a reputation for being strictly evidence-based in her approach to medicine. She had seen too many desperate parents grasp at straws, looking for meaning in random coincidences. "It's probably just the HVAC system," she said, not looking up from the charts she was reviewing. "Or maybe construction noise from somewhere in the area." Sound can be deceptive, especially at night when everything else is quiet. But Jessica persisted. "The timing is too consistent, Doctor." Williams. "And the effect on the children is noticeable. Their sleep patterns are better on the nights when it happens, and their stress indicators are lower." Dr. Williams finally looked up, her expression softening slightly. She had worked with Jessica for years and knew that the nurse had an almost intuitive understanding of her patients. If Jessica thought something was worth investigating, it probably was. Keep tracking it, she said finally. Make notes of when it happens, how long it lasts, and any changes you observe in the patients. If there's really a pattern, we'll figure out what's causing it. Meanwhile, in room 308, Lily Morgan was finally beginning to show signs of recovery from her own exhaustion. She had slept better the night before than she had in weeks, and though she couldn't quite explain why, she felt more hopeful than she had since Tommy's diagnosis. She sat beside his bed, reading him stories from his favorite book, when she noticed that other parents were lingering in the hallway, talking in hushed tones. Curious, she stepped outside and found herself in conversation with Maria Santos, whose daughter Isabella had been battling leukemia for 6 months. Maria was a soft-spoken woman with tired eyes and calloused hands that spoke of long hours working multiple jobs to pay for her daughter's treatment. "Did you hear it last night?" Maria asked, her voice filled with wonder. "The singing?" Lily shook her head. She had been so deeply asleep that she hadn't heard anything unusual. But as Maria described the gentle, rhythmic sound that had filled the air, Lily felt a strange sense of recognition, as if she had heard it in her dreams. "Isabella slept through the night for the first time in weeks," Maria continued. "Usually she wakes up every few hours, crying from the pain or the nightmares. But last night she slept like an angel." Other parents began to join the conversation, each sharing their own experience with the mysterious sound. There was David Kim, whose son had been born with a severe heart defect and was waiting for surgery. There was Rebecca Thompson, whose daughter had been in a car accident and was slowly recovering from traumatic brain injury. And there was Carlos Rodriguez, whose twin boys were both fighting a rare genetic disorder. Despite their different backgrounds and circumstances, they all shared a common thread of worry and hope, of sleepless nights and desperate prayers. And now they shared something else, the experience of this unexplained phenomenon that seemed to bring peace to their children and comfort to their own weary hearts. As the day wore on, word of the mysterious sound continued to spread. Some of the hospital staff remained skeptical, but others began to pay closer attention. The night shift nurses started keeping informal logs, noting when the sound occurred and how the children responded. The security guards, who patrolled the grounds throughout the night, began to listen more carefully during their rounds. But it was James Patterson, a security guard with 20 years of experience, who first saw something that would change everything. James was a former military man with a keen eye for detail and a healthy respect for things he couldn't easily explain. He had served 2 tours overseas and had learned to trust his instincts, even when they led him into territory that couldn't be easily categorized or understood. It was around 2 in the morning when James was making his usual rounds of the hospital perimeter. The night was clear and cool, with a gentle breeze rustling through the pine trees that surrounded the building. He had just finished checking the main entrance when he heard the now familiar humming sound drifting from the direction of the forest. James paused, listening carefully. The sound was definitely coming from the woods, but it was unlike anything he had heard before. It wasn't mechanical, like the HVAC system or construction equipment. It wasn't human, like someone singing or playing music. It was something else entirely, something that seemed to resonate with the natural rhythm of the forest itself. Intrigued, James decided to investigate. He followed the walking path that led from the hospital toward the tree line, his flashlight cutting through the darkness ahead of him. The humming grew louder as he approached the forest, but it remained gentle and soothing, never becoming harsh or threatening. As he reached the edge of the woods, James stopped and turned off his flashlight, allowing his eyes to adjust to the darkness. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see the outlines of the trees and the shadows between them. The humming continued, seeming to come from deeper in the forest, but James could also hear something else, the soft sound of movement, like something large moving carefully through the underbrush. James remained perfectly still, his military training kicking in as he assessed the situation. Whatever was out there was big, but it was moving with deliberate care, not the frantic energy of a frightened animal or the aggressive posture of a predator. There was something almost reverent about the way it moved, as if it were participating in some kind of sacred ritual. The humming reached a crescendo and then began to fade, and as it did, James caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. It was large and dark, with a distinctive shape that made his heart skip a beat. For just a moment, silhouetted against the moonlight, he saw what appeared to be a bear, standing upright on its hind legs, its massive form perfectly still, as if it were listening to something only it could hear. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the shadows, and the forest fell silent once again. James stood there for several more minutes, waiting to see if the creature would reappear, but the woods remained quiet and still. Finally, he turned and made his way back to the hospital, his mind racing with questions and possibilities. Back in the children's wing, the effects of the mysterious visitation were already becoming apparent. Tommy Marshall was sleeping more peacefully than he had in weeks, his vital signs stable and his breathing easy. Isabella Santos had not woken up once during the night, and her mother had been able to get some much-needed rest as well. Throughout the ward, children who had been restless and anxious were now sleeping soundly, their small faces relaxed and peaceful. Jessica Brooks made her rounds, checking on each patient and making notes in their charts. The correlation was undeniable. On the nights when the humming occurred, the children's condition seemed to improve, if only temporarily. Their pain levels decreased, their sleep was more restful, and their overall demeanor was calmer and more positive. But Jessica was a practical person, and she knew that correlation didn't necessarily imply causation. There could be any number of explanations for what they were observing. Maybe the sound was somehow affecting the hospital's environment in a way that promoted healing. Maybe it was simply the power of suggestion, with parents and staff expecting the children to feel better and therefore interpreting their behavior more positively. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something more at work here, something that couldn't be easily explained by medical science or rational thinking. Jessica had been a nurse long enough to know that healing involved more than just medications and procedures. Sometimes, the most powerful medicine was hope itself, and hope could come from the most unexpected sources. As dawn approached and the night shift prepared to hand over to the day staff, Jessica found herself thinking about the conversation she had had with Ethan Marshall at the window. There had been something in his expression, a mixture of wonder and gratitude that went beyond simple relief at hearing that he wasn't imagining things. It was the look of a man who had been given a gift, even if he didn't fully understand what that gift was or where it had come from. The morning brought new challenges and responsibilities, but it also brought something else, a sense of anticipation that hadn't been there before. Parents who had been dreading the long nights now found themselves looking forward to the possibility of hearing the mysterious sound again. Children who had been frightened and anxious began to ask their parents about the music in the trees, and some even requested that their beds be moved closer to the windows so they could listen more carefully. Dr. Williams, despite her initial skepticism, found herself paying closer attention to the patterns Jessica had been tracking. The data was preliminary and far from conclusive, but there did seem to be a correlation between the occurrence of the sound and improved patient outcomes. Sleep quality was better, pain medication requirements were lower, and overall mood and cooperation were noticeably improved. But it was the conversation with James Patterson that really caught her attention. The security guard was not given to flights of fancy or wild speculation. If he said he had seen something unusual in the forest, then he had seen something unusual. And if that something was connected to the mysterious sounds that seemed to be having such a positive effect on the children, then it deserved serious investigation. Dr. Williams decided to reach out to Dr. Michael Chen, a colleague who worked with the local wildlife management agency. If there was indeed a bear or other large animal in the area, it was important to know about it for safety reasons. But she was also curious about the possibility that the animal's behavior might be connected to the phenomena they had been observing in the hospital. Dr. Chen was intrigued by the story and agreed to look into it. He had heard of cases where animals seemed to be drawn to places of human suffering, and while the scientific explanation for such behavior was still debated, the anecdotal evidence was compelling. He promised to send someone to investigate the area around the hospital and to review any recent reports of bear activity in the region. As the investigation began to take shape, the families in the children's wing continued to experience the nightly visits from their mysterious benefactor. The sound came almost every night now, usually around the same time, and its effect on the children was consistently positive. Word began to spread beyond the hospital, and local news stations started to pick up the story. But for the families who were living through it, the media attention was secondary to the profound sense of comfort and hope that the phenomenon brought to their lives. In a place where uncertainty and fear were constant companions, the nightly humming had become a source of stability and peace. It was something they could count on, something that reminded them that they were not alone in their struggles. Ethan Marshall found himself looking forward to the evening hours in a way he hadn't since Tommy's diagnosis. The sound had become a kind of meditation for him, a time when he could let go of his worries and simply exist in the moment. He would stand at the window, listening to the gentle rhythm, and feel his anxiety slowly dissolve into something more manageable. Lily, too, had begun to experience the healing power of the mysterious visitor. Though she had initially slept through the sound, she now made a point of staying awake to listen. There was something deeply moving about the experience, something that spoke to her on a level that went beyond rational understanding. It was as if the forest itself was reaching out to comfort them, offering a kind of solace that no human words could provide. Tommy, despite his illness, seemed to be responding to the nightly visits as well. His doctors were cautiously optimistic about his progress, noting improvements in his blood work and overall condition that couldn't be entirely attributed to the medical treatments he was receiving. There was something else at work, something that was supporting his body's natural healing processes in ways that were difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. As the first chapter of their unexpected journey drew to a close, the families in the children's wing found themselves part of something larger than their individual struggles. They had become a community, bound together not just by their shared circumstances but by their shared experience of wonder and hope. The mysterious sound from the forest had given them something precious. The knowledge that healing could come from the most unexpected sources, and that sometimes the most powerful medicine was simply the presence of something that cared. The humming continued night after night, a gentle constant, in a world that often seemed chaotic and unpredictable. And with each passing evening, the families grew stronger, more hopeful, and more connected to something beautiful and mysterious that they were only just beginning to understand. As the second night of documented occurrences approached, James Patterson prepared for another patrol with heightened awareness. He had filed his initial report about the bear sighting, but he knew that his superiors would need more concrete evidence before taking any action. Tonight, he would be ready with his camera and a more systematic approach to observation. The hospital seemed quieter than usual as evening settled over the building. Visiting hours had ended, and the usual bustle of daytime activity had given way to the more subdued rhythm of the night shift. In the children's wing, parents settled into their familiar routines of bedside vigils, while nurses moved quietly through the halls, checking on patients and adjusting medications. Ethan Marshall had positioned himself at the window earlier than usual, determined not to miss the beginning of the phenomenon. Lily sat beside Tommy's bed, holding his small hand and reading softly from a book of poetry that her mother had given her years ago. The words seemed to take on new meaning in this context. Verses about hope and perseverance that felt like prayers in the dim hospital room. At exactly 1:47 a.m., the humming began. This time, it seemed stronger, more defined, as if whatever was creating the sound had grown more confident or more determined. The rhythm was the same gentle, hypnotic pattern they had come to recognize, but there was something additional now, something that sounded almost like harmony, as if multiple voices were joining together in the mysterious song. Jessica Brooks was making her rounds when the sound began, and she immediately noticed the effect on her patients. Children who had been restless began to settle, their breathing becoming deeper and more regular. Monitors that had been beeping irregularly found steady rhythms. Even the most anxious parents seemed to relax, their faces softening as the gentle music filled the air. In room 312, Mrs. Chen sat beside her grandson's bed, tears streaming down her face as she listened to the sound. The boy had been in a coma for 2 weeks following a severe asthma attack, and the doctors had been cautiously pessimistic about his chances for full recovery. But as the humming continued, Mrs. Chen could swear she saw his eyelids flutter, as if he were trying to wake up to listen to the beautiful music. Down the hall, Maria Santos watched in amazement as her daughter Isabella began to smile in her sleep. The little girl had been through so much pain and fear over the past months that genuine smiles had become rare and precious. But now, with the mysterious lullaby filling the room, Isabella's face was peaceful and happy, as if she were dreaming of something wonderful. Outside, James Patterson had positioned himself at the edge of the forest with a clear view of the hospital building. He had his camera ready and had even brought along a small recording device, hoping to capture some evidence of whatever was creating the phenomenon. As the humming began, he trained his camera on the area where he had seen the bear-like figure the night before. For several minutes, nothing happened. The sound continued, seeming to emanate from deep within the forest, but James saw no movement among the trees. He began to wonder if the previous night's sighting had been a trick of the moonlight, or his own imagination playing tricks on him after too many years of night shifts and too much coffee. Then, just as he was beginning to doubt himself, he saw it again. The figure emerged from the shadows between 2 large pine trees, moving with the same careful, deliberate pace he had observed before. But this time, James was ready. He began taking photographs, adjusting his camera's settings to account for the low light conditions. Through the viewfinder, he could see that his initial assessment had been correct. This was definitely a bear, and a large one at that. But as he continued to observe and photograph, James began to notice details that challenged his understanding of typical bear behavior. The animal was not foraging or marking territory, or engaging in any of the activities one would normally expect from a wild bear near a human settlement. Instead, it seemed to be focused entirely on the hospital building, its massive head turned toward the children's wing, as if it were listening to something or watching for some kind of response. The bear moved closer to the building, stopping at the edge of the courtyard that separated the forest from the hospital grounds. From this vantage point, it had a clear view of the windows of the children's wing, and James could see that several of those windows were occupied by parents and staff members who were listening to the mysterious humming. What happened next would stay with James for the rest of his life. The bear slowly rose up on its hind legs, reaching its full impressive height of nearly 8 feet. But instead of the aggressive or threatening posture one might expect, the animal's stance was almost reverent. Its front paws held loosely at its sides, its great head tilted slightly upward as if it were offering some kind of prayer or benediction to the building and its occupants. The humming reached its peak intensity at exactly the moment the bear stood upright, and James realized with a shock that the sound was coming from the animal itself. The bear was singing, if such a word could be applied to the deep, resonant tones that seemed to vibrate through the ground and into the very foundations of the hospital. James continued taking photographs, his hands trembling slightly with excitement and awe. He had never seen anything like this in his 20 years of security work, and he doubted that many people had witnessed such a scene in the entire history of human-animal interaction. This was something unprecedented, something that challenged everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior and the boundaries between species. The bear remained in its upright position for nearly 10 minutes, its song continuing without interruption. During this time, James could see movement in the hospital windows as more parents and staff members came to observe the phenomenon. Some had their phones out, presumably trying to record what they were seeing, but James doubted that the low light conditions would allow for clear images. As the humming began to fade, the bear slowly lowered itself back to all fours. But instead of immediately retreating into the forest, it remained at the edge of the courtyard for several more minutes, as if reluctant to leave. Its gaze seemed to move from window to window, taking in the faces of the people who were watching from inside the building. Then, with the same deliberate care it had shown throughout the encounter, the bear turned and walked slowly back into the forest, disappearing among the trees as quietly as it had appeared. The humming faded to nothing, leaving behind only the normal sounds of the night and the memory of something extraordinary. James lowered his camera, his heart pounding with excitement and disbelief. He had the photographs, he had the recordings, and he had witnessed something that would change how everyone thought about the mysterious phenomena that had been affecting the children's wing. This was not just a random occurrence or a case of mistaken identity. This was intentional, purposeful behavior from an animal that seemed to understand, on some level, that its presence and its song were providing comfort to the human families inside the building. Back in the hospital, the effects of the bear's visit were immediately apparent. Children who had been struggling with pain or anxiety were now sleeping peacefully. Parents who had been on the verge of emotional collapse were now sitting quietly, their faces filled with wonder and something that looked very much like hope. The entire atmosphere of the children's wing had been transformed, as if the bear's song had somehow infused the very air with healing energy. Dr. Williams arrived at the hospital early the next morning to find her staff buzzing with excitement about the previous night's events. Jessica Brooks had detailed notes about the improved patient outcomes, and several parents had approached her with stories about their children's remarkable responses to the mysterious visitor. But it was the photographs and recordings that James Patterson had captured that really drove home the magnitude of what they were dealing with. The images clearly showed a large black bear standing upright in the hospital courtyard, its posture unmistakably deliberate and purposeful. The recordings captured the full range and complexity of the humming sound, revealing harmonics and patterns that suggested a level of sophistication that was difficult to reconcile with typical animal vocalizations. Dr. Williams studied the evidence carefully, her scientific mind trying to process what she was seeing. As a medical professional, she was trained to look for rational explanations, to rely on peer-reviewed research and established protocols. But as a human being, she could not deny the profound effect that this phenomenon was having on her patients and their families. She decided to call Dr. Chen immediately, knowing that his expertise in wildlife behavior would be crucial in understanding what they were dealing with. When she described the photographs and the observed behavior, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That's unusual, Doctor," Chen finally said, his voice filled with the same mixture of excitement and disbelief that Dr. Williams was feeling. I've never heard of anything quite like this. Bears are capable of complex behaviors, and they do have sophisticated communication systems, but this level of apparent intentionality toward humans is unprecedented. He agreed to come to the hospital that afternoon to review the evidence and to discuss possible explanations for what they were observing. In the meantime, Dr. Williams began reaching out to colleagues at other institutions, hoping to find similar cases or research that might shed light on the situation. The story was beginning to attract attention from beyond the local medical community. Word had spread through social media and local news outlets, and reporters were starting to call the hospital asking for interviews and access to the families involved. Dr. Williams was cautious about media attention, knowing that it could easily sensationalize what was, at its core, a deeply personal experience for the families in the children's wing. But she also recognized that this phenomenon represented something potentially significant for the field of medicine, and possibly for human understanding of animal behavior and interspecies communication. If the bears' visits were indeed having a measurable positive effect on the children's health outcomes, it could open up entirely new avenues of research into alternative and complementary healing modalities. As the day progressed, more families began sharing their experiences with the mysterious visitor. Parents who had been struggling with despair and exhaustion found themselves talking about hope and possibility. Children who had been frightened and withdrawn began asking questions about the singing bear and expressing excitement about the possibility of hearing the beautiful music again. Tommy Marshall had woken up that morning with more energy than he had shown in weeks. His color was better, his appetite had returned, and he was asking to sit up and play with his toys. Ethan and Lily could hardly believe the transformation, and while they knew better than to get their hopes up too quickly, they couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had changed. "Do you think it will come back tonight?" Tommy asked, his young voice filled with anticipation. Ethan looked at his son, seeing a spark in his eyes that had been missing for too long. "I don't know, buddy," he said honestly. "But if it does, we'll be listening." As evening approached, there was a palpable sense of anticipation throughout the children's wing. Parents positioned themselves at windows, staff members found excuses to linger in the hallways, and even some of the children who were well enough stayed awake past their usual bedtimes, hoping to experience the phenomenon for themselves. James Patterson prepared for another night of observation, this time with additional equipment and a colleague to help document whatever might occur. The hospital administration had given him permission to set up a more formal observation post, recognizing the potential importance of gathering as much data as possible about the bear's behavior and its effects on the patients. Dr. Chen arrived at the hospital just as the sun was setting, carrying with him several pieces of specialized equipment for recording and analyzing animal vocalizations. He had spent the afternoon reviewing the photographs and audio recordings from the previous night, and his excitement was evident as he discussed the implications with Dr. Williams and Jessica Brooks. "The vocalizations are unlike anything I've encountered in 30 years of studying bear behavior," he explained as they walked through the children's wing. "The frequency patterns suggest a level of intentionality that we typically associate with much more complex social species. And the timing, the consistency of the visits, the apparent focus on this specific building, it all points to behavior that is far more sophisticated than we would normally expect." As they spoke, parents and staff members began to gather, drawn by the promise of answers and the hope of understanding what they had been experiencing. Dr. Chen listened carefully to their accounts, asking detailed questions about timing, duration, and observed effects on the children. What emerged from these conversations was a picture of an animal that seemed to possess an almost supernatural understanding of human suffering and a desire to provide comfort. The bear's visits were not random or opportunistic. They were purposeful and consistent, timed to coincide with the hours when the children's anxiety and pain were typically at their highest levels. As the clock approached the time when the bear had appeared on previous nights, a hush fell over the children's wing. Parents gathered at windows, staff members positioned themselves in hallways, and Dr. Chen set up his recording equipment in the courtyard, hoping to capture more detailed data about the bear's vocalizations and behavior. The waiting was almost unbearable. Every small sound from outside caused heads to turn and hearts to race. Parents held their breath. Children pressed their faces to windows, and staff members found themselves making silent prayers to whatever force might be responsible for bringing this mysterious healing presence into their lives. At 1:43 a.m., 4 minutes earlier than the previous night, the humming began. This time, the sound seemed to come from multiple directions at once, as if the entire forest had joined in the bear's song. The harmonies were richer and more complex, creating patterns of sound that seemed to resonate not just in the air, but in the very bones of everyone who heard them. Dr. Chen's equipment immediately began registering readings that made his eyes widen with amazement. The frequency patterns were unlike anything in his database of animal vocalizations, showing levels of complexity and intentionality that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal communication capabilities. In the courtyard, the bear appeared right on schedule, but this time it was not alone. A smaller figure emerged from the forest behind it, moving with the same careful, deliberate pace. Dr. Chen adjusted his camera and realized that they were looking at what appeared to be a juvenile bear, following its mother in what looked like a learned behavior. The mother bear took her familiar position at the edge of the courtyard and rose to her full height, beginning her extraordinary song. But now, the younger bear also stood upright, adding its own voice to the harmony in a higher, sweeter tone that seemed to weave through its mother's deeper vocalizations like a thread of silver through dark fabric. The effect on the children was immediate and profound. Throughout the wing, young patients who had been struggling with pain, fear, and illness began to show signs of remarkable improvement. Vital signs stabilized, breathing became easier, and the general atmosphere of the ward was transformed from one of anxiety and suffering to one of peace and hope. Tommy Marshall, who had been awake and waiting by the window with his parents, began to smile as the bear's song filled the air. For the first time since his diagnosis, he looked like a normal, healthy child, his face glowing with wonder and joy as he listened to the extraordinary music from the forest. In room 312, Mrs. Chen's grandson opened his eyes for the first time in 2 weeks, his gaze immediately turning toward the window where the beautiful sounds were coming from. His grandmother wept with joy as he whispered his first word in days: music. Throughout the wing, similar scenes were playing out as children responded to the bear's healing presence with improvements that their doctors would later describe as remarkable, unprecedented, and medically inexplicable. Pain levels dropped, anxiety decreased, and the overall sense of hope and possibility seemed to infuse every corner of the ward. The bears maintained their vigil for nearly 15 minutes before slowly lowering themselves back to all fours. But, before retreating into the forest, the mother bear did something that would be talked about for years to come. She approached the hospital building until she was standing directly beneath the windows of the children's wing, close enough that the people inside could see the details of her massive, gentle face. For a long moment, she simply stood there, looking up at the windows where dozens of human faces were looking down at her with expressions of awe and gratitude. It was a moment of connection that transcended species boundaries, a recognition of shared experience and mutual compassion that left everyone who witnessed it fundamentally changed. Then, with a final, soft vocalization that sounded remarkably like a lullaby, the mother bear turned and led her cub back into the forest, leaving behind a children's wing full of people who had just experienced something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The second night of documented bear visits had provided even more evidence of the extraordinary nature of what was happening at Mercy General Hospital. The presence of the juvenile bear suggested that this was not just individual behavior, but possibly a learned tradition being passed down through generations. The increased complexity of the vocalizations and the measurable improvements in patient outcomes provided compelling evidence that something truly remarkable was taking place. As the families settled back into their rooms and the staff began processing what they had witnessed, there was a sense that they were all part of something much larger than themselves. The mysterious bear and her cub had given them a gift that went beyond medical treatment or conventional healing. They had provided hope, wonder, and a profound reminder that healing could come from the most unexpected sources. Dr. Chen spent the rest of the night analyzing his recordings and reviewing his observations, his excitement growing with each new piece of data. This was the kind of discovery that could reshape understanding of animal behavior, interspecies communication, and the very nature of healing itself. But for the families in the children's wing, the scientific implications were secondary to the immediate, tangible benefits they were experiencing. Their children were getting better, their own spirits were lifting, and they had been given something precious, the knowledge that they were not alone in their struggles, that somewhere in the dark forest beyond the hospital walls, a mother bear and her cub were keeping watch over them with a love that transcended all boundaries. Over the following weeks, the pattern of nightly visits became as regular as the hospital's own rhythms. Dr. Chen had established a comprehensive monitoring system with multiple cameras positioned around the courtyard and sensitive audio equipment that could capture even the subtlest variations in the bear's vocalizations. What they discovered was nothing short of extraordinary. The mother bear, whom the staff had begun calling Luna, appeared to have developed an intricate understanding of the hospital's schedule and the specific needs of individual patients. Jessica Brooks had been keeping detailed logs of patient responses, and the correlations were becoming impossible to ignore. On nights when Luna's songs were particularly long and complex, children with severe conditions showed the most dramatic improvements. When her vocalizations included certain frequency patterns, patients with respiratory issues breathed more easily. When she incorporated specific rhythmic elements, children struggling with pain seemed to find relief that lasted well beyond the duration of her visit. The most remarkable case was that of little Sarah Mitchell, a 4-year-old girl who had been in the pediatric intensive care unit for 3 months following a rare autoimmune disorder that had left her in a semi-conscious state. Her parents, David and Amanda Mitchell, had been told to prepare for the possibility that Sarah might never fully recover. But on the 7th night of Luna's documented visits, something extraordinary happened. Sarah's room was on the corner of the building, with windows facing both the courtyard and the forest beyond. As Luna began her nightly song, Sarah's monitors started registering changes that the medical staff had not seen in months. Her brain activity increased, her heart rate stabilized, and for the first time since her illness began, her eyes began to track movement and respond to light. Dr. Williams was called to Sarah's room as the improvements became apparent, and she arrived just as Luna was reaching the crescendo of her song. What she witnessed challenged every assumption she had made about the relationship between conventional medicine and the mysterious healing presence that had taken up residence in their forest. Sarah not only opened her eyes fully, but began to vocalize along with Luna's song, creating soft, melodic sounds that seemed to harmonize with the bear's deeper tones. It was as if the child was participating in some kind of ancient communication ritual, responding to Luna's call with an instinctive understanding that transcended language and species barriers. Amanda Mitchell wept as she watched her daughter engage with the world for the first time in months. her small voice joining the ethereal chorus that filled the night air. David stood beside his wife, his own eyes filled with tears as he witnessed what could only be described as a miracle unfolding before them. The improvement in Sarah's condition continued throughout Luna's visit and persisted even after the bear had retreated into the forest. By morning, Sarah was fully conscious and responsive, asking for her parents and showing interest in her surroundings for the first time since her illness began. Her doctors were astounded by the sudden reversal of her condition, unable to provide any medical explanation for such a dramatic and rapid recovery. Word of Sarah's remarkable improvement spread quickly through the hospital and beyond. Medical professionals from other institutions began requesting access to Dr. Chen's research data, hoping to understand the mechanisms behind what appeared to be a genuine case of inexplicable healing. Researchers specializing in animal behavior, acoustic therapy, and alternative medicine began arriving at Mercy General, all eager to study the phenomenon that was challenging fundamental assumptions about healing and recovery. But it was Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in bioacoustics from the University of Washington, who provided the first scientific framework for understanding what Luna was accomplishing. Dr. Rodriguez had spent decades studying the therapeutic effects of sound and vibration on human physiology, and when she analyzed Dr. Chen's recordings of Luna's vocalizations, she discovered something remarkable. The frequency patterns in Luna's songs corresponded almost exactly to the optimal ranges for promoting cellular regeneration, reducing inflammation, and stimulating the production of endorphins and other natural healing compounds in the human body. It was as if Luna had somehow intuited the precise acoustic conditions needed to trigger the body's own healing mechanisms, and was deliberately modulating her vocalizations to achieve maximum therapeutic effect. "What we're seeing here is unprecedented, Doctor," Rodriguez explained to the assembled medical staff during a presentation of her findings. "This bear has somehow developed the ability to produce what amounts to a sophisticated form of sound therapy, targeted specifically to the needs of sick children. The precision and consistency of her vocalizations suggest a level of understanding about human physiology that we would not expect to find in any wild animal." The implications of Dr. Rodriguez's research were staggering. If Luna was indeed capable of such sophisticated therapeutic intervention, it raised profound questions about animal intelligence, interspecies empathy, and the potential for developing new forms of acoustic healing based on her techniques. Meanwhile, the families in the children's wing were experiencing their own profound transformations. The nightly visits from Luna and her cub had become a source of hope and strength that sustained them through the darkest moments of their children's illnesses. Parents who had been on the verge of despair found themselves looking forward to each evening, knowing that Luna's presence would bring peace to their children and comfort to their own weary hearts. Ethan Marshall had begun keeping a journal of Tommy's progress, documenting not just the medical improvements but the emotional and spiritual changes that seemed to accompany Luna's visits. Tommy's blood work had been steadily improving, but more importantly, his spirit had been restored. The frightened, withdrawn child who had entered the hospital weeks earlier had been replaced by a boy who talked excitedly about the singing bear and asked endless questions about animals and nature. "She knows we're here," Tommy told his father one evening as they waited by the window for Luna's arrival. "She knows we need her help, and she comes because she loves us." Ethan was struck by his son's simple, profound understanding of what was happening. While adults struggled to analyze and categorize Luna's behavior, Tommy had grasped the essential truth. This was an act of love, pure and simple. Luna was offering her gift not because she had been trained or conditioned to do so, but because she possessed a capacity for compassion that transcended the boundaries between species. Lily Morgan had also been profoundly affected by Luna's presence. The stress and anxiety that had consumed her during the early weeks of Tommy's hospitalization had gradually given way to a sense of peace and acceptance that she had never experienced before. She found herself sleeping better, eating regularly, and even smiling again, all changes that she attributed directly to the healing influence of Luna's nightly visits. The transformation was not limited to the families directly affected by childhood illness. Hospital staff members reported feeling more positive and energetic during their shifts, and even visitors to the hospital commented on the unusually peaceful and hopeful atmosphere that seemed to permeate the entire building. Dr. Williams began incorporating observations about Luna's visits into her treatment protocols, noting correlations between the bear's presence and improved patient outcomes in her medical reports. While she was careful not to make claims that couldn't be scientifically substantiated, she could not ignore the consistent patterns of improvement that coincided with Luna's therapeutic interventions. The story of Luna and her remarkable healing abilities began to attract international attention. Medical journals published articles about the phenomenon. Wildlife documentaries featured segments about the therapeutic bear, and families from around the world began reaching out to Mercy General, hoping to bring their own sick children to experience Luna's healing presence. But Luna's gift was not without its complexities. As her fame spread, the hospital began receiving requests from researchers, journalists, and curiosity seekers who wanted to observe or study her behavior. Dr. Williams and Dr. Chen were faced with the challenging task of balancing scientific inquiry with the need to protect both Luna's natural behavior and the privacy of the families she was helping. They established strict protocols for anyone wanting to observe Luna, limiting access to serious researchers, and ensuring that her nightly visits would not be disrupted by crowds or excessive human activity. The hospital also worked with local wildlife authorities to establish a protected zone around the forest area where Luna and her cub lived, ensuring that their habitat would remain undisturbed. As the weeks passed, Luna's therapeutic abilities seemed to grow even more sophisticated. She began varying her vocalizations based on the specific conditions affecting different children, developing what appeared to be a repertoire of healing songs tailored to particular types of illness or injury. Children with cancer received one type of acoustic treatment, while those with neurological conditions experienced different frequency patterns and rhythmic structures. The young cub, whom the staff had named Echo, was also developing her own healing abilities under her mother's guidance. Echo's higher-pitched vocalization seemed particularly effective with younger children and those suffering from anxiety or emotional trauma. The sight of the mother and cub working together to provide comfort and healing to the human families had become one of the most moving and inspiring experiences that anyone at the hospital had ever witnessed. Dr. Chen's research revealed that Luna and Echo were not simply making random sounds, but were engaging in what appeared to be a sophisticated form of diagnostic assessment before beginning their therapeutic interventions. They would spend several minutes at the edge of the courtyard, apparently listening and observing, before beginning their vocalizations. Their songs would then be precisely calibrated to address the specific needs they had identified in their human patients. The bond between Luna and the families she was helping grew stronger with each passing night. Children who had been afraid of the dark now looked forward to bedtime, knowing that Luna would soon arrive to sing them to sleep. Parents who had felt helpless in the face of their children's suffering now had a source of hope and comfort that sustained them through the most difficult moments. Tommy Marshall's recovery had progressed to the point where his doctors were cautiously optimistic about his long-term prognosis. His blood counts had normalized, his energy levels had returned to normal ranges for a child his age, and his overall condition had improved so dramatically that his medical team was beginning to discuss discharge plans. But Tommy was not ready to leave Luna behind. he had formed a deep emotional connection with the bear who had sung him through the darkest period of his young life, and the thought of never seeing her again filled him with sadness that his parents found heartbreaking to witness. "Can't we stay just a little longer?" Tommy asked his mother one evening, as they watched Luna and Echo take their positions in the courtyard. "I don't want to say goodbye to her yet." Lily understood her son's attachment to Luna, and she shared his reluctance to leave the healing presence that had become such an important part of their lives. But she also knew that Tommy's recovery was a testament to Luna's success, and that other children needed the bear's help as much as Tommy had. "Luna will always be with you," Lily told her son, holding him close as they listened to the familiar comforting sounds of the nightly healing session. "Even when we go home, you'll carry her song in your heart, and it will help you stay strong and healthy." Tommy seemed to understand, nodding solemnly as he continued to watch Luna and Echo through the window. The connection he had formed with the healing bears had taught him something profound about love, compassion, and the interconnectedness of all living beings. It was a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life, shaping his understanding of what it meant to care for others and to be cared for in return. As Luna's therapeutic work continued to produce remarkable results, the scientific community began to take serious notice of the implications for human medicine. Research teams from major universities started arriving at Mercy General to study Luna's techniques and to explore the possibility of developing new acoustic therapies based on her methods. Dr. Rodriguez's ongoing analysis of Luna's vocalizations revealed increasingly sophisticated patterns that suggested the bear was not only responding to the immediate needs of individual patients, but was also tracking their progress over time and adjusting her treatments accordingly. It was as if Luna possessed a form of medical intuition that allowed her to assess the effectiveness of her interventions and modify them as needed to optimize healing outcomes. The discovery that an animal could demonstrate such advanced therapeutic capabilities raised profound questions about the nature of intelligence, empathy, and healing itself. Luna's abilities seemed to transcend the traditional boundaries between instinct and conscious intention, suggesting that the capacity for sophisticated healing behaviors might be more widespread in the animal kingdom than previously believed. But for the families whose children had been touched by Luna's healing presence, the scientific explanations were less important than the immediate, tangible benefits they had experienced. Luna had given them something precious: hope in the face of despair, comfort in times of suffering, and the knowledge that healing could come from the most unexpected sources. As each child recovered and prepared to leave the hospital, they carried with them not only improved health, but also a profound appreciation for the mysterious forces that had contributed to their healing. Many families stayed in touch with the hospital, sending updates about their children's continued progress and expressing ongoing gratitude for Luna's intervention in their lives. The children's wing at Mercy General had been transformed from a place of suffering and anxiety into a sanctuary of hope and healing, thanks to the nightly presence of a mother bear and her cub who had somehow understood that their songs could ease human pain and promote recovery. Luna's gift had created a community of families bound together by their shared experience of wonder and healing, and the effects of her presence would continue to ripple outward, touching lives and inspiring hope long after each individual family had returned home. The therapeutic relationship between Luna and the children at Mercy General represented something unprecedented in the documented history of human-animal interaction. It was a reminder that healing could come from the most unexpected sources, and that the bonds between species could transcend the traditional boundaries of understanding and communication. Luna's nightly vigil had become a testament to the power of compassion, the mystery of healing, and the profound connections that exist between all living beings who share the capacity to suffer and the desire to ease that suffering in others. As the weeks turned into months, Luna's presence at Mercy General became an established part of the hospital's healing environment. Her therapeutic interventions were no longer seen as anomalous events, but as an integral component of the comprehensive care provided to the children and families who found themselves in need of hope and healing. The bear, who had emerged from the forest to offer her gift of song, had become a permanent part of the community, a bridge between the natural world and the human world of medicine and healing. The final case that would forever cement Luna's reputation as a healer involved a young boy named Marcus Chen, the grandson of Mrs. Chen, who had been among the first to notice the bear's healing presence. Marcus had been born with a severe congenital heart defect that required multiple surgeries and left him in a fragile state that made even the simplest activities dangerous for his young body. Marcus had been in the hospital for 2 months, waiting for a heart transplant that might never come. His condition was so delicate that his doctors had warned his family that he might not survive long enough to receive the organ he desperately needed. Mrs. Chen had maintained a constant vigil by his bedside, and she had been among the most devoted observers of Luna's nightly healing sessions. On what would prove to be a pivotal night, Marcus's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. His heart rate became erratic, his breathing grew labored, and his medical team prepared his family for the possibility that this might be the end of their long struggle. Mrs. Chen sat beside her grandson's bed, holding his small hand and whispering prayers in Mandarin, her heart breaking as she watched the child she loved more than life itself slip away from her. Luna seemed to sense the crisis unfolding in the hospital. That night, her song was different from anything the staff had heard before. Instead of her usual position at the edge of the courtyard, Luna approached the building until she was standing directly beneath Marcus's window. Her vocalizations were deeper, more intense, and seemed to carry an urgency that had not been present in her previous healing sessions. Echo joined her mother in this extraordinary intervention, and together they created a complex harmonic structure that seemed to resonate through the very foundations of the building. The sound was so powerful and moving that it drew staff members from throughout the hospital, all of whom stood in silent amazement as the 2 bears poured their healing energy into the night air. Marcus's response to Luna's intensive therapy was immediate and dramatic. His heart rate began to stabilize, his breathing became easier, and his color improved noticeably as the bears continued their healing song. Mrs. Chen watched in wonder as her grandson's vital signs improved with each passing moment of Luna's intervention. But the most remarkable aspect of Marcus's response was not just the improvement in his physical condition, but the profound sense of peace that seemed to settle over him as Luna sang. For the first time in months, the expression of pain and struggle that had marked his young face was replaced by a look of serenity and contentment that brought tears to the eyes of everyone who witnessed it. Luna and Echo maintained their intensive healing session for over an hour, the longest duration that had ever been recorded. When they finally began to withdraw, Marcus had not only stabilized, but had shown improvements that his medical team would later describe as miraculous. His heart function had improved to levels that had not been seen since before his current crisis, and his overall condition had strengthened to the point where his doctors began to express cautious optimism about his short-term prognosis. The intensive healing session that Luna and Echo had provided for Marcus became the subject of extensive analysis and documentation. Dr. Rodriguez's acoustic measurements revealed frequency patterns and harmonic structures of unprecedented complexity, suggesting that the bears had somehow accessed therapeutic techniques that went beyond anything previously observed in their healing work. More importantly, Marcus's dramatic improvement following Luna's intervention provided compelling evidence of the bear's ability to respond to acute medical crises with targeted therapeutic interventions. It was as if Luna possessed a form of medical intuition that allowed her to assess the severity of a patient's condition and adjust her healing methods accordingly. The news of Marcus's remarkable recovery spread quickly through the medical community and beyond. The case was documented in multiple medical journals and became the subject of conference presentations and research papers that explored the implications of Luna's therapeutic abilities for the future of healing and medicine. But for Mrs. Chen and her family, the scientific recognition of Luna's abilities was secondary to the simple, profound gratitude they felt toward the bear who had saved Marcus's life. Luna had given them back their beloved child, and no amount of academic analysis could diminish the miracle they had experienced firsthand. As Marcus continued to recover under Luna's ongoing care, his case became a symbol of the extraordinary healing potential that could emerge from the most unexpected sources. The bear, who had emerged from the forest to offer her gift of song, had demonstrated that healing was not limited to traditional medical interventions, but could encompass forms of therapy that transcended the boundaries between species and challenged conventional understanding of what was possible. Luna's work at Mercy General had evolved from a mysterious phenomenon into a recognized form of therapeutic intervention that was being studied and documented by researchers from around the world. Her nightly healing sessions had become an integral part of the hospital's treatment protocols, and her presence had transformed the children's wing from a place of suffering into a sanctuary of hope and healing. The bear, who had begun her healing work as a solitary figure in the forest, had become the center of a community of families, medical professionals, and researchers who were all united in their recognition of the profound gift she had brought into their lives. Luna's therapeutic abilities represented something unprecedented in the documented history of human-animal interaction, and her ongoing presence at Mercy General served as a daily reminder of the healing potential that existed in the natural world. As the second part of Luna's story drew to a close, the bear and her cub had established themselves as permanent fixtures in the healing environment of Mercy General Hospital. Their nightly vigil had become a source of hope and comfort for countless families, and their therapeutic interventions had contributed to recovery outcomes that challenged conventional medical understanding. Luna's gift of healing song had created a bridge between the human world of medicine and the natural world of instinctive compassion, demonstrating that the capacity for healing existed in forms and places that had never been fully recognized or understood. Her presence at the hospital had become a testament to the power of interspecies empathy and the profound connections that could exist between all living beings who shared the capacity to suffer and the desire to ease that suffering in others. The bear, who had emerged from the darkness of the forest to offer her healing presence to sick children, had become a symbol of hope, compassion, and the mysterious forces that could contribute to recovery and healing. Luna's story was far from over, and her continued presence at Mercy General promised to bring comfort and healing to many more families in the days and months to come. The mystery of Luna's healing abilities continued to deepen as doctor. Patricia Hawthorne, a renowned animal behaviorist from Stanford University, arrived to conduct the most comprehensive study yet undertaken of the therapeutic bear's remarkable capabilities. Dr. Hawthorne had spent 3 decades studying complex animal behaviors, but nothing in her extensive experience had prepared her for what she encountered at Mercy General Hospital. Working closely with Dr. Chen and Dr. Rodriguez, Dr. Hawthorne established a sophisticated monitoring system that could track not only Luna's vocalizations and movements, but also the physiological responses of the children who were receiving her therapeutic interventions. The data they collected over the following weeks would fundamentally change scientific understanding of animal intelligence, empathy, and healing capabilities. What Dr. Hawthorne discovered was that Luna's therapeutic work involved far more than simply producing healing sounds. The bear was engaging in what could only be described as sophisticated diagnostic behavior, using a combination of acoustic analysis, scent detection, and visual observation to assess the specific needs of individual patients before beginning her therapeutic interventions. Luna would spend considerable time at the edge of the courtyard before beginning each healing session, apparently listening to sounds emanating from the hospital that were below the threshold of human hearing. Dr. Hawthorne's sensitive audio equipment revealed that Luna was detecting and analyzing the subtle acoustic signatures of various medical conditions, from irregular heartbeats to labored breathing patterns, and was using this information to calibrate her therapeutic vocalizations. Even more remarkably, Luna appeared to be capable of detecting chemical changes in the air around the hospital that indicated stress, pain, or illness in the children inside the building. Her acute sense of smell allowed her to identify specific medical conditions and emotional states, and she would adjust her healing approach accordingly. The sophistication of Luna's diagnostic abilities was matched by the precision of her therapeutic interventions. Dr. Rodriguez's continued analysis of the bear's vocalizations revealed that Luna was producing specific frequency combinations that corresponded to the optimal acoustic conditions for treating particular types of illness and injury. Children with respiratory conditions received vocalizations that promoted easier breathing and reduced inflammation in their airways. Those suffering from neurological disorders were treated with frequency patterns that seemed to stimulate neural regeneration and improve cognitive function. Patients dealing with emotional trauma and anxiety received gentler, more melodic interventions that promoted the production of calming neurotransmitters and hormones. The precision and consistency of Luna's therapeutic approach suggested a level of medical understanding that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and the capacity for interspecies healing relationships. Luna was not simply responding to human suffering with instinctive compassion. She was engaging in sophisticated medical intervention that required advanced diagnostic skills and therapeutic knowledge. Echo's role in the healing process was also becoming clearer as doctor. Hawthorne's research progressed. The young cub was not merely mimicking her mother's behavior, but was developing her own specialized therapeutic abilities under Luna's careful guidance. Echo's higher-pitched vocalizations were particularly effective with younger children and those suffering from anxiety disorders, and she seemed to possess an intuitive understanding of how to provide comfort and reassurance to frightened patients. The relationship between Luna and Echo represented something unprecedented in the study of animal behavior. The deliberate transmission of sophisticated healing knowledge from one generation to the next. Luna was not only providing therapeutic services to the children at Mercy General, but was also training her offspring to continue this remarkable work, ensuring that the healing tradition would persist beyond her own lifetime. As Dr. Hawthorne's research continued, she began to uncover evidence that Luna's therapeutic abilities might not be entirely unique. Historical records and folklore from various cultures contained references to animals that had provided healing services to humans, suggesting that the capacity for interspecies therapeutic relationships might be more widespread than previously believed. Indigenous communities in particular had long traditions of recognizing and working with animals that possessed healing abilities. Native American tribes had stories of bears that served as healers and protectors, while traditional Chinese medicine included references to animals that could diagnose and treat human illnesses through various forms of intervention. Dr. Hawthorne's research suggested that Luna might represent not an anomaly, but rather a rediscovery of healing relationships that had existed between humans and animals for thousands of years. The modern medical establishment had lost touch with these traditional forms of therapy, but Luna's presence at Mercy General was providing an opportunity to reconnect with ancient healing wisdom in a contemporary scientific context. The implications of this research extended far beyond the specific case of Luna and her therapeutic work. If animals possessed sophisticated healing abilities that could be scientifically documented and understood, it opened up entirely new possibilities for integrative medicine that combined conventional medical treatment with animal-assisted therapeutic interventions. Medical schools began incorporating information about Luna's healing methods into their curricula, and veterinary programs started exploring the possibility of training animals to work as therapeutic partners in hospital settings. The bear, who had emerged from the forest to help sick children, had inadvertently launched a revolution in medical thinking that would influence healing practices for generations to come. But the most profound impact of Luna's work remained the immediate, tangible benefits experienced by the families whose children had been touched by her healing presence. Each night, as Luna and Echo took their positions in the courtyard and began their therapeutic vocalizations, they were not just providing medical intervention but were offering something even more precious: hope, comfort, and the knowledge that healing could come from the most unexpected sources. The children who had been healed by Luna's songs carried with them not only improved health, but also a deep appreciation for the interconnectedness of all living beings. They had learned that compassion could transcend species boundaries, that healing could take many forms, and that the natural world contained wisdom and therapeutic power that complemented and enhanced conventional medical treatment. Parents who had experienced the darkest moments of their lives watching their children suffer had been given a gift of hope that sustained them through their most difficult trials. Luna's presence had reminded them that they were not alone in their struggles, that the natural world itself was offering support and comfort to their families in their time of need. The medical staff at Mercy General had been transformed by their exposure to Luna's healing work. Doctors and nurses who had entered the profession to help sick children had discovered new dimensions of healing that expanded their understanding of what was possible in medical practice. Luna's therapeutic interventions had become an integral part of their treatment protocols, and her presence had created a more holistic approach to pediatric care that addressed not only physical symptoms but also emotional and spiritual needs. As the months passed, Luna's reputation as a healer spread throughout the medical community and beyond. Families from around the world began bringing their sick children to Mercy General, hoping to experience the healing benefits of Luna's therapeutic presence. The hospital established a special program to accommodate these families, providing them with extended stay options and ensuring that their children would have access to Luna's healing sessions. The waiting list to receive Luna's therapeutic interventions grew longer each month, but the bear's capacity for healing seemed limitless. She continued her nightly vigil with unwavering dedication, adjusting her therapeutic approach to meet the needs of each new patient, while maintaining her ongoing care for children who required extended treatment. Luna's work had created a unique healing environment at Mercy General that attracted not only families seeking medical treatment, but also researchers, medical professionals, and spiritual seekers who were drawn to witness the extraordinary relationship between the therapeutic bear and her human patients. The hospital had become a pilgrimage destination for those seeking to understand the deeper mysteries of healing and the profound connections that could exist between different species. The bear, who had begun her healing work as a mysterious presence in the forest, had become a symbol of hope and possibility for people around the world. Her story had been featured in documentaries, written about in books, and shared through social media platforms that carried her message of healing and compassion to millions of people who had never set foot in Mercy General Hospital. But Luna remained focused on her primary mission, providing healing and comfort to sick children and their families. Each night, she emerged from the forest with Echo by her side, ready to offer her gift of therapeutic song to those who needed it most. Her dedication to this work was absolute, her compassion unlimited, and her healing abilities continued to evolve and expand as she encountered new challenges and opportunities to help. The mystery of how Luna had developed her extraordinary therapeutic abilities remained unsolved, but the impact of her work was undeniable. She had transformed the practice of pediatric medicine at Mercy General Hospital, created new possibilities for animal-assisted therapy, and provided hope and healing to countless families who had been facing the darkest moments of their lives. Luna's story was a testament to the power of compassion, the mystery of healing, and the profound connections that could exist between all living beings who shared the capacity to suffer and the desire to ease that suffering in others. Her nightly vigil in the courtyard of Mercy General Hospital had become a beacon of hope for families around the world, a reminder that healing could come from the most unexpected sources and that the natural world contained wisdom and therapeutic power that could complement and enhance the best that modern medicine had to offer. As Luna's second phase of documented healing work drew to a close, the bear and her cub had established themselves as integral members of the Mercy General community. Their therapeutic interventions had contributed to recovery outcomes that challenged conventional medical understanding, and their presence had created a healing environment that attracted families and medical professionals from around the world. The bear, who had emerged from the darkness of the forest to sing healing songs to sick children, had become a living symbol of the mysterious forces that could contribute to recovery and healing. Luna's story continued to unfold with each passing night, each new patient, and each family that experienced the transformative power of her compassionate presence. Her gift of healing song had created a bridge between the human world of medicine and the natural world of instinctive compassion, demonstrating that the capacity for healing existed in forms and places that had never been fully recognized or understood. Luna's ongoing work at Mercy General promised to bring comfort and healing to many more families in the months and years to come, while her influence on medical practice and understanding would continue to ripple outward, touching lives and inspiring hope throughout the global community of healers and those seeking healing.